Thank you for joining us. This is the third and final of our three-part webinar series. If you haven't seen the first two in the series, they're available on demand on our website. The first two links there go directly to the two webinars where you can find all, and we will post this one as well. The events page, the link to the events page is at the bottom there. So in the last two webinars, we looked at the various components, inputs, outputs of the spreadsheet, really just wiring up a spreadsheet to be able to use it dynamically inside Squirrel. But then we sort of started to go into more advanced things like setting colors dynamically, turning things on and off. Sorry, in webinar 2, we turned the KPI tiles on and off in the SaaS revenue calculator. And with that, we did some dynamic positioning. So when we turned those off, we moved the charts up a bit so they could cover. We had a pop-up dialog to hold the controls, which turned things like the KPIs on and off. And we looked at swapping images, both using dynamic visibility and using a dynamic URL. So we've gone from just sort of putting a front end on a spreadsheet to starting to use the spreadsheet to be able to drive that front end. And that was really where we're going to go today. We're going to use more and more of that spreadsheet logic to be able to add more and more capabilities to the front ends that we're adding on top of our spreadsheets, or indeed starting to look at the way in which we can, it maybe not putting Squirrel on top of an existing spreadsheet, but using Squirrel to build a sort of a web-based application that doesn't have a spreadsheet underneath to start with, but you're using the spreadsheet logic to drive that application. We'll see a few examples of those as we go through. So today, and this is the last slide before we get into the product, we're going to look at a number of things: embedding external content using the WebView container, and actions on mouse movement around the project, which will use the hotspot. So two new components will cover WebView container and hotspot. Then the next title is move data more efficiently, which looks at the data mover function. But there's so many different uses, and we'll use that in 3 or 4 different ways, and you should get a feel for just how powerful the data mover component is. Then we'll have a little look at external access through the Google Sheets connector, and also allied with that, how we can trigger actions with Zapier. And finally, we'll look at some animation using the timer component. So a lot to get through. Each of these will be a different demo, so we better get started, or I better get started. So we're going to start, as I say, with embedding external content. If I just pull in WebView start. So what we're going to do here is pull in, first of all, some Wikipedia content. So I have this URL here, which is the Wikipedia /moon, which gives us details about the moon. And I'm going to put this into a WebView container like that. Make it a little bigger. And simply to get external content from things that are available on the internet, I can just click this URL and bind it up to this thing here, which is the moon. And hey presto, I've got that content inside my Squirrel project. So if I come and preview this, we see we've got that Wikipedia content sitting inside my Squirrel project. If I export that to the Squirrel cloud, I can send the link out, it will be in there. I put it in PowerPoint, so it becomes a native part of the Squirrel project. You wouldn't really be able to tell it's from somewhere else, it's just sitting there inside the project. But as with everything in Squirrel, we can make that a little more dynamic. And so I'm going to add a radio button here, and that radio button, using techniques we saw in the last 2 webinars, is going to take its values from this list here. It's going to, I'll make it selected item equal to moon. And then I'm going to get it to insert its data. So the label that is selected by the user is going to be inserted into there. So obviously when we run this, you can see that that's changing the cell here, Jupiter, Mars, Earth. But we want that to change this URL. And so rather than having moon in there, we're going to take that moon off and just use a spreadsheet formula to add that moon on there. So that's the moon back there. But now what we have is an interactive version of this whereby I can click and change that URL. So I now got dynamic content from the web inside my Squirrel project. Again, so this is a Squirrel component controlling what's in there. So again, native part of the systems, it's very easy to bring external content in. It doesn't have to be on a specific, a public website like this. We also have some content I'm going to bring in here from, actually it's Random House, who are the publishers, and this is an example. This is an example of something they offer for their books, which is a widget which allows you to go through some of the pages, a bit like an Amazon preview. And so we're going to take this, in this sheet here, we've got some details of some books, and we're just using a formula here to create the link that we need. And so what I'm going to do is now change the link here from the Wikipedia about the moon into that one about the book and Random House. Now, if I preview this, we see it's got all the. I'll actually make it a bit bigger. I can pull this down here. I've got all the functionality that we had there, so I can move through here. So even if it's an interactive capability that you're putting, not just a scrolling web page, but we can put different things in here. But obviously, I want to make this dynamic as well. So this time I'm going to wire this up to the names of the books here. So each of these will have the names of the books, and I'm going to insert the name of. Well, actually, I'm not going to insert. What I'm going to do here, let me just get my selected item is going to be that quantum entanglement one. And now we're going to stray away. All the insertions we've done so far have been putting labels, single value labels into a spreadsheet. We're going to do something different now, which is a row. So getting on to the more powerful capabilities of inserting data. And what we're going to say here is what I want to do is based on what I've selected in these four, I want to take a row of this table and insert it into this destination up here. And the reason for that is that this URL contains all three of these things in here that to make the URL. So the formula depends on all three of those. We have to lift one of these rows up into there, but that's very easily done with this row insertion. So this is just going to take, depending on whether I check 1, 2, 3, or 4, it's going to take the first, second, third, or fourth row here. And so then if I come in here, it comes in with the quantum entanglement. But then if I do that, I get the order of time or the Martian. So again, dynamic content, and again, we can use the capabilities of the embedded page nicely inside Squirrel, all down here. So that's the next step we're taking here, which is inserting and moving data around the sheet. It isn't just pushing a value in like we did with colors and things in the previous webinars. That's really now starting to move data around in a more significant way. So we're taking up a row of data and putting it there, and we'll actually see that and more instances of how we move data around in the other projects we're looking at. So the second one that we're going to look at is the hotspot, so actions on mouse movement. And so if we come back here, I'm going to open my hotspot starting point. I won't save that away. So what I have here is I have a project with 3 charts. And what I want is when I hover over the charts to see the details in a larger chart. So we're going to do it for the first one, set it all up, and then we'll extend it to the next 2. And the way we're going to do this is, as I say, hover over, and the hover is implemented by a hotspot. So if I put a hotspot component over there, then what that allows me to do is to push data into the spreadsheet on both the mouse over and the mouse out events. And so what I'm going to do is have a show chart trigger. It's initially going to be 0 because I don't want the chart. 0 means don't show it in this case. And I'm going to use a technique I'm going to use again and again through the webinar today, which is I'm going to say equals, if that is equal to 1, then it's going to be 0, otherwise 1. So it's just a toggle. So whenever if I put a 1 in there, this goes to 0. If I put a 0 in there, this goes to 1. So this is just always the opposite of that. And what I'm going to say is in the mouse over here, the source data is going to be that. The destination data is going to be that, like that. I'll make that yellow so we know it's going in there. And I'm going to do the same for the mouse out. So both moving in and moving out of that hotspot will change the state. And then the last thing I need to do is to say, well, this graph is visible when that is equal to 1. So now if I come in here, see it's off. But if I hover over here, it appears. And you can see as I hover in and out, you look at that, hover in, the 1, hover out, it goes back to 0. So I've got that working now. So that's hovering over there, showing me the detail in the chart. Now we could just replicate this 1, 2, 3 charts and then make them individually dynamically visible because we're going to on different hotspots. So if I can have a couple more hotspots here and copy and paste them down onto there. So we could just use these hotspots to do independently turn on and off charts. But say I had 20 of these, that's 20 extra charts. It's going to be a bit of overhead. It's hard to manage all those components. It's much better to be able to move the data into this chart. And so what we're going to do is we're going to each hover over on these charts is going to move data, is going to, first of all, bring up the chart, but then move different data into it. And so in order to do that, what we're going to do is I'm going to change this a little and say, I'm going to have 3 of these, copy them down like that. And the second one is going to put a 2 in there. And this third one is going to put, is going to put a 3 in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use these 2 hotspot. So the second hotspot, the source data is going to be number 2, both for the in and the out. And similarly for the third one, the source data is going to be the third one there and the third one there. Now they're all writing into this same cell here. And so what we'll see now, if I come in and go into debug, then I go over 1, you'll see that the show chart is 1. If I go over 2, it's 2. And I go over 3, it's 3. So we want the chart to show whenever, so this is now the hover. It's not actually the chart, but we show the chart here if we're going to have another little formula which says if that is equal to 0, then 0, otherwise 1. So whatever value it is, whether I put a 1, 2, or 3, this is going to be 1. And then we just need to change from here to here. So now we'll have, every time I hover on these, it'll make a change to one of these, it'll change that and make this dynamically visible. So if I do that there, see if I hover, it goes, and sort of the same chart has been pulled up for each 3 of them. Now it's the same chart, but it's currently got the same data in it. So we want to change that. And the way we're going to do that is by moving data around. And so what we're going to have is the chart data is going to be down here, and I'm going to mark this yellow to show that we're moving data into it. Now I could go in here based on this number here, which is 1, 2, or 3, depending on what I've hovered over. I could sort of do index and use an index function, but I can never remember the syntax of an index function. It gets quite complicated, but it's more to calculate. It's more efficient, particularly if you've got lots of data, to use a new function we look at, which is the data mover. So what the data mover here, I'm going to say, again, I'm going to move a row. And that row is going to come from this source here, which is this set of data here. And then the destination is going to be this set of data here. And it's going to be based on a row index, which is just going to be there. So every time that index changes 1, 2, or 3, it's going to pull the right row out of here. And now all I need to do is to wire up the chart to that data. So the values are going to come from here. And we had the number, the title came from up there, but it's now going to be down there. So now what you can see is if I come into debug, then I go over there, I get 1, I go over here, I get 2, and over here I get 3. And you can see as I move over there, the data is changing down in the spreadsheet below. And because that's not using formulas, it's more efficient. There's only one chart, so there's not so much clutter in the project. So a really sort of it's a really neat way of doing this. And in this simple case, it wouldn't make that much difference if I did it with formulas or did it with 3 charts. But in real world projects, that can save a lot of time. And so you start to get a feel for the power and capabilities of Data Mover. And in fact, the next thing we're going to look at is another example of Data Mover doing something slightly different. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into this what if. Right. So what we want to do, a typical case here is I've got a profitability analysis here. I can move my things around up and down like this. But sometimes, often, people say, well, actually, I want to go back to where I started. I want to go back to the starting point. And yes, I could push sort of F5 and refresh this or go out and come back in again. But actually, it can be quite nice to offer a button in the project to be able to do that. Now, in some cases, you will just be able to use a simple push button to do this. If I say that's reset there, because that moves data around. So let's see what I've got here. Is that these are the numbers that I'm inputting to my the inputs to my project. So I put them down here. But the problem is, I could use this push button just to copy these base values. Let me there are the base values there. But the problem is that this is also a base value, and there's no way with one copy to get that this number here, this 5%, and these into the same way. So I can't just use one button here. So what I'm going to do is use the button to trigger, and again, if that equals 1, then it's 0, otherwise 1. So another of those toggles, make that yellow, and I'm going to wire it up so that again, when I push that, it's going to toggle this state here. But now what I want to do is I want that to push these values to reset the data. And again, we're going to use a data mover to do that. So I'm going to move area 1, and that's just going to be a block of data, and it's going to be the source is going to be this data down to 30, and the destination is going to be the same data up here. And then it's going to be triggered on that reset trigger. But then I need to add a second one here. So I'm sparking 2 actions on one button. And so this will be area 2. Again, it's going to be a block. The source is just going to be that cell. The destination is going to be that cell there. And again, I'm going to trigger on the same cell here. So I push the button, this cell gets changed, and both of these data movers will get triggered so that these things are copied up here. So if I now come up here and preview it, then we see that it lets me take all of these down to 0. And then we'll see when I push the reset, it'll reset them back to their initial state. So how to reset a project, even if all your data is not in the same place, whereas you just have as many data mover entries, and you could do this in multiple data movers. It's nice to keep them together because I can sort of label there. And so however many different areas I need to reset, I can just have one for each of them, all triggered off the same cell, and it all works really nicely. So it's a really nice technique for being able to move data in the background on a specific trigger so that things happen in the project. And so now what we're going to do is, again, it's another use of data mover, but with a slightly different way of managing data. So up until now, we've either moved a cell into another cell or a range into another range or pulled a row out of it. But we've got this other capability in here called filtered rows, which allows us to filter rows rather than moving one to another. It's actually taking a filter on a block of data. And so what we've got here, if I come to the top, is a little spreadsheet with all the Excel and Google functions in here, their categories, and whether they're supported by Squirrel. And so I want to have a set of data here. So if yes, it's wired up. So this is, if I'd wire this up to here, like that, then I've got, like, in theory, I've got this, but actually I'd like to manage it a bit better so I can see what's going on here without having to scroll through the whole list and read them all. So the first thing I'm going to do is be able to navigate this by category, and that's very straightforward. What we can do is we can just say, I'm going to take all the categories, and we see, notice if I come in here having done just that, then I get multiple entries: math, text, math, text. So they're duplicated. But if I come to here and say I want to do filtered rows, then immediately I get the unique values in here. It's only one entry for each, which is exactly what we want. And what I'm going to say is I want to take the source, which is this data here, Control Shift down and across, so that binds to that range there. I'm going to do something which is here, which might seem a little surprising, but I'll show you why in a minute. I'm going to just put a star, do Control R. So I just put a star along the bottom of this data. That will make my navigation much easier. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that, put these headings there. I'm going to say that when I select this, and in fact, I might give it an initial value of math there. Then what I'm going to do is the destination of this filtered row is going to be here. And you see, because I got those stars in the bottom, I can easily get to the bottom just by doing Control Shift down arrow key. So now I've got my data in there. If I rewire this table to look at those, then I've got my filter going on here. So if I come in here, I've got math and sort of, oh, I've also messed that up somehow. Let me have a quick look. I know why. I've got this down here. I've got the wrong range in there. Let me just check I've got all the right ranges. That's right. And that's right. So maybe that'll be better. There we go. There we go. That's better. So it's now all working. I just had the wrong range selected. So that's financial and logical. So I've got all those working now. But what I want to do is I want to be able now to filter by searching through them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that I've got search, a box, a text input box, and that's going to insert data into this cell here. And that's the search term. And what I'm going to do, actually, let me just take these down here. So I've got some data to work with to start with. Like, it's down there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that search term, I need something to search on. So is it a match for this? And if it's a match, I'm going to use a function. So the function is going to be search. And search works by saying if this is in that, then it's going to find it. Now it says value. If it doesn't find it, then it gives me an error. So I'm going to have to put an error on here. So is error on that. So that'll be true or false depending on whether it's an error. So, and then I put an if around it. So if it's an error, then it doesn't match. Otherwise, it does match. There's a 1 there. And the final thing I want to do this is I want it always to match if this is empty. So what I say here is if this equals the empty string, then I want it to be 1, so I want it to match. Otherwise, I want it, this search term here. So having constructed that, actually what I need to do also is to say that J1 is always going to be 1 here and here, like that. So now if I copy this down, Control D, then you see because I got no search term in there, this is matching everything. But if I put an A, or let's say a B in there, then only the ones with a B in them are now matching. I put an A, you see all the ones that are an A are matching until I get down to ones that don't have an A in them. So now I've got that there. So what I want to do is I want to be able to filter this, again, filtered rows, but this time filter on whether that's 1 or 0. And the match is just going to be on 1. Oh, 1 there. That's in there. And so if I now add, so there from before, if I add a data mover, what I'm going to say is go filtered rows. The source is going to be the ones that we filtered for the category. And the destination is going to be this set of rows here. Next there, let's put the headers in there. Across there. Like that. And then the filter column is just going to be this match column. Oh, sorry, I need to, filter column is going to be this match column without that bottom one. And then the filter label is just going to be 1. So what I should be able to do now is to preview this. And if it comes up, then I've got all the maths one. But if I type A, then that's not. So that data filter, the data mover. Oh, I know. I have to change my output. So the table is actually looking at the data that I'm now filtering. That's looking at the previous one there. So that now all should say if I come in here, there, I've only got ones with a B on it. That's all of them. Type A, B. I can look at the math functions of average. So I've got all the, so I can now do a text search. I'm using a data mover, and it's a data mover that's filtering not on the values, sort of math or compatibility or info, but on the value that's sitting in there. So the next demo is going to look at two things. The first is access to external data, in this case through a Google Sheets connector, and then looking at triggering external actions using Zapier, and that will actually write back into the Google Sheets connector. So we'll look at how to do both of those. And that's going to be based around this spreadsheet here. So we come into Google Drive and load up my order spreadsheet. Just a few rows of orders. It's called orders. The sheet inside is called orders, and we're going to read this data first of all into Squirrel. So the first thing we need to do is to get the link to this. So we go to the share with others. It needs to be publicly available so anyone on the internet can view this. If that's not that, you can set it using this drop down here. But once we have set it to anyone can view, then we copy the link and then pop to Squirrel. And here we add a connection, which is the Google Sheet connection. And then we just paste in that link we just took out of the Google Sheets sharing option. That then goes, interrogates the sheet, and we can see that their orders sheet inside the workbook is there. And then we get the choice to either create a new data sheet or select a range in the existing sheet. And the select a range in the existing sheet is the option that's been there since the beginning, but now we have this new option to create a data sheet. When we do that, we see this new data sheet comes in here. I can maybe rename that to call it Google Data. And the nice thing about this over and above the other way of doing it is I can click this button and immediately see the data from that spreadsheet inside the Squirrel Designer at design time. It's grayed out because I can't do anything with the sheet because it's specialized to just retrieving that data, but I can see it here and work with it. So for example, if I want to be able to show it on the canvas, I just come in here, say I'll take those with some lines to extend it down when more data comes in, and I'm going to take this and then not show the grid line. So now I've got, that's a representation of that data on there. And when I run this, so I go to preview, that's actually going at runtime and getting that data there. And we can see that because if we go back to the sheet, maybe add another one, line there, that's automatically saved by Google. If we come back to here and rerun the Squirrel project, then we see that it's got that that last line in there. Now, it's not in here because if I want to see it at design time, I need to go back into my connector and resync it there. So in design time, to get it update, you have to click the resync. But every time I preview this, or indeed every time the dashboard is run, that will get the data because it's refreshed on load. But what we want to do here, having got the data, is provide the user with a way of updating that data into the sheet. And so we're going to come to sheet 1 here. We've got supplier, we've got product, and we've got amount. And what we want to do is we want to be able to take this and send it off using Zapier in this case to this Google Sheet. So trigger an external action in Zapier to be able to then update the Google Sheet. So if we add some more data in here, just some test data, hill farm, oranges, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to be some sample data for us. Now, obviously, we need the user to be able to input that. So we're going to wire this up. I'm going to put a text input box, which is going to connect to the supplier. Control C, Control V to copy and paste that, and then wire that up to oranges to the product field. And then we'll just maybe put a slider in here that's going to go to 1,000, and it's going to take on this value here. Actually, only 2,000 because that's already over 1,000 there. So we got some input controls to change these. So when we run this, obviously I can type in here, take out the farm, and that's sort of changing this. So that's changing these cells down there. But what we want to be able to do is to trigger a Zapier action to be able to update this Google spreadsheet with this information. So we come down to connections, click on Zapier, and add a Zapier trigger in there. We could call this update order sheet. And then we want to first of all select the data we're going to zap. So it's this data here is going to be sent to Zapier. And we can leave all the defaults, so give it a name, orders update, and then we register the trigger. That goes to the Squirrel Cloud. When the Squirrel Cloud goes to Zapier and says, right, I need a zap key, a key that's going to be asked for in my zap when I come into Zapier. So we copy that, and that's copied to the clipboard. So we come back to the browser and go into Zapier. I can create a new zap, and this zap is going to be a Squirrel zap. So I come in here, and well, actually it's there, I've used it before, so I could type in Squirrel to search for it, and the type of trigger here is a Squirrel trigger, and then I say continue, and then I need to add in that key that I just got from Squirrel, so that's my zap key, and so I can refresh the fields and continue. So that I can test that trigger to make sure everything's working with it should. Then that's communicating back with the Squirrel Cloud, and you'll see that test data has come up through from Squirrel into Zapier. So I go in here, I'm going to want an action. That's going to trigger an action. I want what action I want to take. Well, it's going to be a Google Sheets action, and that's going to be create a spreadsheet row. And then when I continue, it says choose an account. So I've already logged in. I just logged into my account, and Zapier stores my Google Sheets credentials securely on the server. Then I come in and say, well, which drive? It's just my normal Google Drive. Which spreadsheet? Well, it goes and looks for the ones in my Google Drive, and it's the orders one that we saw earlier. And then the worksheet is going to be the orders worksheet inside there. So now what it says is, okay, that worksheet has got 3 columns, supplier, product, and amount. What do you want to put in those columns of your new row? So I can come in here and say supplier is going to be from supplier. The product is going to be from product. And the amount is going to come from amount. So that wires up the incoming data from Squirrel into the trigger or the action that's going to be triggered to write back to the Google Sheet. So I say continue. It says test and continue. So let's see, it's Hill Farm oranges 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll see in my Google Sheet there that data isn't there. So if I now test and continue, that will send that data. So if we come here, there's the Hill Farm 1, 2, 3, 4. I need to remove these so that we don't have them anymore, just to update back to where we started. And now I can say I'm going to turn on that zap. So that's going to turn on my zap, and if I can name my zap again as update orders, And then if I come back here, I see it sitting in my Zap dashboard, turned on and ready to go. And so that means anytime from Squirrel that Zap is triggered, it'll take the data in those cells and send it through to Google Sheets. So if we try that now, what I can do is, well, actually what I want to do is, you see this Zap can be triggered when the project loads, which is not what we want, or when a cell changes. So we're going to do a cell change here for a trigger like we've done a number of times before. So I'm going to kind of push button, and I'll have the trigger here. Again, make that yellow. I'm going to do the old trick here, equals if that equals 1, 0, 1. So it just toggles, and then the push button is just going to take that one and put it into there. I change the label to say submit. And the final thing we need to do now is to take this Zap and say that it happens when that cell changes there. So every time I click the button, that cell will change and trigger the Zap, which will take this data here, which I've typed in there, and send it to the Google Sheet. So if we do that now, let's go and say I'm going to odds farm. Let's go back to sort of, let's say, water rather than ice we did before, and this is going to be 225. So if I now click submit, that goes away, triggers the update in Zapier. Zapier then pushes it out to the Google Sheet. So if we come back to the Google Sheet, then we should see, there we go, that's that line that I just had in Squirrel has now been posted into my orders in Google Sheet. And if we come back to Squirrel, then we see if we come, this hasn't updated there because they've not told it yet how to update. When I come back to Squirrel and go back into debug, we'll see it loads up and see odds farm water 225 is there. So it is reading it back in. But we want to go one step further. And what we want to do is we want to say that when this is triggered, we want this to update. Now, the problem we've got there is that, so the Google Sheets here is we could say just refresh on cell change and then bind it to this trigger, but that would issue the refresh at the same time as the submit to Zapier. And because going to Zapier to Google Sheets will take maybe a second or two, it's quite likely that if we immediately did a refresh, we would miss that updated data. And that's where we're going to I've misspelled that there, just correct that. We're going to use a timer, which will allow us to delay slightly that update from the Google Sheet. So what we're going to do is we're going to say I want a trigger cell, and that's going to trigger at the same time as the submit is triggered, but it's going to wait, in this case 1000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So I'll just do it for 4 seconds here, and it's going to go from here to here. So this is the, actually move this out, this is the submit trigger, and this is the update trigger, and just copy those down. So this is saying, again, this is the same thing where this is, when this is 1, this is 0, and vice versa. So now this is a trigger which will allow us to trigger the update. So just going through that again, I click submit, it triggers this cell to change, which does two things now. It triggers the Zapier job to go and write the data, but it also triggers this timer. Then 4 seconds later, this timer will move this from here, and then this cell will trigger. And so what we can do is we can go back to our connections, and we can say on the Google Sheets and trigger on cell change of this one here. So 4 seconds later, we'll do an update. So what I should be able to do is if I come in here and I'll say new farm, and this time it's going to be cherries, and we'll go the full up here to 2000. Now when I submit, that's sent to Zapier, which is now sending to Google Sheets. And then 4 seconds later, you can see it updated there. So I've now got the update because I waited long enough for it to be there. Because when Zapier is sort of like a fire and forget. So you push it out to Zapier. There's no way of telling when the Zapier thing has succeeded. You just have to wait. And so this waits 4 seconds, and we get the results. Now that will work well, but you always have to wait 4 seconds, and if you've not got 4 seconds there, if it's not there by 4 seconds, you won't see it. There's one sort of tweak we can make to this, and that is in this timer. So rather this timer saying as a one-shot deal, 4 seconds later, I'm going to move this from here to here, what I'm going to say instead is I'm going to go for a loop, and I'm going to say I'm going to loop 10 times and I'm going to do it in 500 milliseconds. That's half a second. So this is going to change 10 times. It will count. This loop counter is going to count from 1 to 10 every half a second when it's triggered by this. So again, the flow of events is I click submit. That does two things: triggers the Zapier to update the Google Sheet, but also triggers this timer. And now what this timer will do is we'll wait half a second and put a 1 in there, and then another half a second and put a 2 in there, and it will count all the way to 10 over 5 seconds. And each time this updates, then it will do a refresh of the Google Sheet. And so although it's doing 10 refreshes to get one update, but that's not a big deal. It's not consuming any significant resources. But what it means is that within half a second, you'll get it as soon as it's updated. So again, we can do this here. I can sort of say old farm, and what will we do this time? We can do bananas, and we'll say we only want 145 of those. So now I click submit. That's written to Zapier as writing to Google Sheets, but you can see there you got it there much quicker because it was ready. So the Zapier thing happened in about a second or two, and because this was already started and refreshing every 5 seconds, every half a second, then it got that as quickly as it did. So a really nice use of timer, either just to delay something or to make a few repeated attempts at something in order to be able to get data that you don't know when it's updated, but you know that it is going to be updated. So that's external data and external triggers, but nicely finished off there using the timer. And there's one last thing that we're going to look at, which is using the timer in another way, and this is for animation. And one of the things you often want to do is to add animation capabilities, animate a value in your spreadsheet so you can see what's going on. So for example, here I've got to come back to my profitability analysis, and this growth rate here I want to animate. So I want to have a button that just makes it animate to engage my users. And so that push button is going to go up here, which is going to be animate. And what I'm going to do is a trigger here, as we have had before. And that trigger is going to be the same as we've had many times, equals if that is equal to 1, then it's 0, otherwise 1. So that's just triggers that. We'll color that yellow there. And so that's just going to copy that into there. And then what I'm going to do here, that's going to trigger a timer. So the timer is, you can use the timer for many things, but animation is one of them. And this trigger cell is going to be that cell there, so it'll be triggered. And I'm not going to insert a block. I'm going to insert a loop into a counter cell. That loop counter is going to go in there. I'll color that yellow. And the maximum number I'm going to loop to is going to be 20, and I'm going to make that number, and I'll bind that number of loops in to there. So what happens when I run this, you'll see that if I push this animate, I should see a counter running there from, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that's not really fast enough, so I'll take this down to 1/10 of a second rather than 1 second. So I would do that there. Now see, when I click there, it's running up through those numbers. So now what I need to do is the value that I want is going to be, my start value is going to be 0, and my end value 20%. I'll make those both percentages so things are clearer. And then the current value is just going to be equal to the start value plus the end minus the start times the number of counters we've done, times the number of the count we're at, divided by the total there. So that's just going to, if I get it right, times counter. There we go. So now what we see is that when I run this and click that, that's running from 1 to 20%. And now all we need to do is we need to say that this value here is equal to, if this is empty, that equals 0, then we just want 0.05. Otherwise, we want this value down here like that. And so what we should see if we come in here and come to preview is if I click my animate, then we see it's running through that. It runs animation there. So we can use the loop timer to run an animation. So that's all the various things we're looking at today: embedding external content, mouse actions on mouse movement. We saw with the hotspots, many ways of using data mover to do lots of different different and increasingly sophisticated things. Access to external data, and then updating that external data with a Zapier action. And then we looked at animation using the timer. If you want to give any of this a go or anything from any of the 3 webinars, then you can go to squirrel365.io/get-started, get your free account, and all the things you see today you will be able to do for yourself. As I say, the recording will be posted so you can follow along to the recording if you didn't catch some of this. And as we are quite beyond time, I will leave it there. No time for questions, I'm afraid. If anyone does have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. My email address is donald@squirrel365.io, or come onto our support site and ask a question there. Other than that, thank you very much for attending today. With that, thank you very much and goodbye.